I get this question all the time. Can you help us solve the knowledge gap? The short answer is yes. But my next question is, are you sure you have a knowledge gap? Let's talk about why this keeps happening and, more importantly, how to fix it. You may be surprised to learn that what you believe is a knowledge gap actually has very little to do with a knowledge gap. So, before we dive in, let me give you an example of what I mean. You hire great people, they're qualified, they're smart. They may have even done some incredible things in previous roles. So you invest in onboarding and training, you spend the time having them meet with key people in the company, and yet somehow there's still a disconnect. Sound familiar? You may be wondering where you went wrong. Well, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what a knowledge gap is, why they exist, and what you can do to close them without any more unnecessary training, tricks, or tools that don't stick and don't work. So before we solve your knowledge gap, let's define what it is not. A knowledge gap isn't we just need more training or certifications, or you need to hire more people with specific skills. A knowledge gap is actually when critical information, whether it's processes, skills, or even company goals, don't make it to the right people. Some of the most common symptoms are no one knows what other people do in the company. Employees are constantly asking the same questions. Mistakes keep happening. Projects take longer, hindering your ability to scale. Tribal knowledge, where only a few people know how things work, and that doesn't translate to other departments. And bottlenecks, because knowledge isn't shared effectively, holding basic things up. How do knowledge gaps happen? Most companies think the answer is more training or hire more specialized people, as I mentioned earlier. And all of those are great, but training actually is only a part of the solution. Talent is really expensive and hard to find, and it won't correct the real problem. Here's why knowledge gaps, or what you think is a knowledge gap, actually happens. Lack of clear documentation. Processes live in people's heads instead of being written down. You may be thinking, no, everybody knows how to do their jobs, and that's not what I mean. While everyone probably does know how to do their jobs, are they clear where the handoff is and what happens next? Probably not. This is important because teams are working in silos and under the impression that they all wear the weight of the world on their shoulders. Additionally, if one team doesn't know what the next team does with the project, they may be delivering it in a way that causes the next team to do extra work. Or they could have initially done something different in the first place if they just talked about it and what happens next from start to finish. So, if everyone understood the process and process boundaries, you could course correct a gap, and what you think is a knowledge gap actually would just be defined processes. Next is ineffective knowledge transfer. This is when new hires don't get the full picture, and experienced employees don't have a structured way to share their knowledge. This is really common, and we all, for the most part, enjoy what we do. However, most of the steps and tasks are inherent. And when you're trying to explain how you do what you do, you'll naturally skip over steps, tasks, and systems because you do them without even thinking about it. Does that make sense? Next is fast company growth. When companies experience fast growth, that's where business processes evolve, usually by way of personal preference and in a siloed manner. But knowledge sharing, or how that task is done, is unclear to anyone else. So everyone does things the way they want to, making the chances of a different outcome very high. This also leads to tribal knowledge, which then leads to business instability. And if any of those people leave the company, it becomes a huge problem. And lastly, technology overload. Too many systems, too many siloed preferences, and too little clarity on where to find that information. After you've gone over all of that, you may still conclude that you have a knowledge gap where you do need to hire more specialized people to do very specific jobs. But before you do that, make sure you have an actual knowledge gap and not any of the other things that I just mentioned. All right, now for the good part. How do we fix this? I'm going to give you some actionable steps, and you might want to write these down. First and foremost, and you may have known this was coming, document what matters. Create a living document, not a boring 50-page manual no one reads. Yes, even if you're a large organization, I'd rather you start with something small and easy to use and easy to adopt than create something complicated and winded that no one will look at. Just keep it simple, visual, searchable, that kind of thing. The second thing is I want you to centralize that information. One source of truth is key. Make this mandatory, whether it's a SharePoint or a Google Drive, an SOP database, or a project management tool. Make what people need easy for them to find. The third thing is I want you to build a knowledge sharing culture. Encourage mentorship, job shadowing, even things like a Q&A session where tenured employees can openly share their knowledge and expertise. It will turn into a discussion. The fourth step is use technology wisely. Things like AI driven tools, internal knowledge repositories, and automation can help bridge that gap faster. Just be sure to carefully select those tools and integrate them with your current technology. The fifth and final step is reinforce learning continuously. Learning isn't a one and done, and I know you already know that, but make it an ongoing part of your operations. With quick refreshers, just in time training, knowledge gaps aren't a people problem, it's actually a process problem. Fix the way information flows in your company, and you'll see fewer mistakes, more efficiency, and stronger teams. Knowledge gaps are more often than not an information and process gap. You have what you need. It's just a matter of streamlining and systematizing it.